right, let's talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders. As we mentioned earlier in the live stream, and Common Dreams reported, 13 senators have called for a cessation of hostilities, not a ceasefire, but a, quote, humanitarian pause. Bernie Sanders, the next day after this article dropped, joined them in calls for that. He put a video up on his Twitter saying that Israel has the right to defend itself, but they don't have the right to kill people, and so we need a pause in hostilities. Now, again, what this whole semantical game that they're trying to play between humanitarian pause and ceasefire is just crazy, because what we need is an end to the violence as the new status quo. And I guess that's what a ceasefire means in this context, because Bernie Sanders made clear on CNN today that he's against that. So here's Bernie on with Dana Bash.
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go.
Yeah. So you need a ceasefire now as the new status quo, obviously, and that's the bare minimum of what we should be able to expect from progressive champion Bernie Sanders, who, according to Jacobin Magazine, this is an article in 2019, is the best candidate on Palestine. So, Russell, you found this. Do you want to read this text here for everybody and give your take on this?
He's the best. Wait until you see who the worst is.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. And a lot of you who were Sanders supporters, I know we have a lot. This is going to take you back to those halcyon days when you thought that he was worth a damn, because there were a lot of articles around like that back then. Alone among the major presidential candidates, Sanders has repeatedly spoken out about Israel's violence against Palestinians. During the last Gaza war in 2014, he called Israel's use of force disproportionate and indiscriminate. He publicly condemned Israel's killing of peaceful Palestinian protesters during last year's Great March of Return. Quote, "Innocent people are being killed," Sanders told The Intercept. "Those are terrible actions. Instead of applauding Israel for its actions, Israel should be condemned." In an additional tweet, Sanders called the deaths tragic and unequivocally defended Palestinians' freedom of assembly, saying it is the right of all people to protest for a better future without a violent response. Now, I just want to interject. If any of you have not seen Abby Martin's great documentary, The Fight for Gaza, is that what it's called?
I think it's called Gaza Fights for Freedom.
Gaza Fights for Freedom. She shows this, which to my embarrassment, I didn't even know about this. They did a peaceful march for the right to return, and snipers shot at them. That's what he's talking about here. And while many U.S. politicians have rushed to blame Gazans for their own dire circumstances, Sanders has instead pointed to the prolonged Israeli siege as the source of the humanitarian crisis. In a co-authored letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo last year, Sanders decried the massive levels of unemployment and poverty in the blockaded Strip and reminded the Trump appointee that while Israel withdrew its forces from within Gaza in 2005, its continuing control of Gaza's air, sea, northern, southern, and eastern borders have made the humanitarian crisis there even worse. He reiterated his call for rebuilding Gaza, easing the blockade, and restoring U.S. funds to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. So look, he was so good on this issue. Right? He was so great on this issue. So what happened? How do you believe everything he says there and then turn around and be trying to litigate Hamas, which is a core Zionist tactic around this whole conflict? Well, those of us who were at one time, supporters of Bernie Sanders, should be able to answer that pretty easily. Bernie Sanders was always full of fucking shit. Bernie Sanders always took very strong positions on things that had no chance of actually being enacted or becoming law. He is the Democratic Party shell game writ large, where, yeah, we would do it, but we're short a couple votes. We can't do it here. We can't do it there, where they say a lot of good things that you're really going to get behind as long as there's no possibility of any of it actually happening. So when you see an actual case where these fine principles, everything he said there could have been in the Abby Martin documentary. These very fine principles, he has an opportunity to put them into practice. What happens? So we have a video from back then, which this is another thing. Even the media that we relied on, and I'll give the benefit of the doubt that a lot of people didn't really know about some of his record. We didn't see videos like some of a video that went viral this week.
Yeah, so this is from 2014 at a town hall when he is asked about the Israel issue.
Is sending missiles into Israel. Okay. And you know where some of those missiles are coming from? They're coming from populated areas. That's a fact. Hamas has used money that came into Gaza for construction purposes, and God knows they need roads and all the things that they need, and used some of that money to build these very sophisticated tunnels into Israel for military purposes.
For survival purposes.
Okay, one second.
Yes,
no, I don't want to be interrupted. The question was asked. It's a fair question, and I'm trying to.
They don't have the right to
Look,
resist.
if you don't,
Yes, they did.
you know,
Gaza is like
excuse me, shut up.
So yeah, that made the rounds on Twitter this week. That was from 2014. Jumping a little out of order here. This is a
voter
recent
outreach there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is from a write-up in the New Yorker magazine here. Bernie Sanders, the most consistently pro-Palestinian senator, he once lived in Israel, was not eager to take a vanguardist position on the issue. Quote, he finds the Israel situation depressing. Oh, that's too bad. And annoyed. Maybe Peter Dow should be his next campaign manager. They can take mental health breaks when it gets to be too rough for them. He finds the Israel situation depressing, and he's annoyed that people are talking about this instead of the labor strikes, a progressive political staffer told me. Well, that tells you a lot about the chauvinism of the Democrat socialist sort of movement.
Yes.
Because the idea that this issue here, this genocide unfolding before our eyes, is seen as an inconvenient distraction to the really important battles of the day, which is the starting wage for a Ford worker in Michigan. I mean, that speaks to a certain chauvinism. And once again, to be 100% clear, we're not saying that Ford workers in Michigan don't deserve good wages. The whole reason we do this show is to advocate for causes like that. It's not that we don't believe in them, but what did we do? We were covering all that stuff to the minute. When this happened, what did we do? We had to backburner that for a little while because a genocide unfolding before our eyes takes precedence over that. And you have to be a Western chauvinist douchebag to not think that this takes precedence over that. And the fact that Stephanie Kelton here, I'm going to pick a fight with the MMT people. And no, I haven't had a chance to read her book yet. I had to return it before I read it because the late fees, they were sending letters to my house. The library was actually sending letters. It was going to be like the Seinfeld
They'll
scene
send
where
that shit to collections.
Where the library cop shows up to Jerry's apartment. That was next for me if I didn't return the book. But
I sprung for it.
Okay, yeah, Russell actually bought it. But the idea of building an economic system around the premise that your currency is the reserve currency, well, that is then built on the premise that you maintain an empire. And how are empires maintained? This way. And so that really speaks to a lot of the blind spots of the whole Bernie movement. They were sort of hidden in plain sight all along. But especially, during the Trump years where we didn't have a new war breakout every 3 months, those horrible times, we just didn't think of it. This just wasn't on our radar as much as it should have been. And that's on us. I'm not trying to make excuses. Like, it should have been on our radar anyway, right? I'll eat shit for that happily. But I'm just saying that's why it went down the way it did, and that's why his movement has such a blind spot when it comes to foreign policy, broadly speaking, especially this one.
Right. Yeah. It's really it's a teachable moment, because if you look at a lot of people who are coming more out of communist movements, that is their critique of democratic socialists, that all they really care about is their little slice of the pie, and they don't have a global perspective. They don't have a broader perspective. They never really think about where, suppose you have that prosperity to provide that union wage, who's paying for that? Who globally is paying for that?
Well, that's baked into Bernie's pitch. We are the wealthiest country in the world, and yet we have all these people living in poverty.
Why are we that wealthy?
Why
He never asks that.
Right. Why are we the wealthiest country in the world? How do we maintain our position as the wealthiest country in the world? Is there an underbelly to that needs exploring? The DSA types obviously weren't terribly interested in going there as long as Bernie was leading their movement. To their credit, DSA has actually been very, very vocal on this issue. So I'm not looking to trash them in a blanket way, but I'm just saying, under the banner of the Bernie Sanders campaign, there was no eye on the ball here. There was no eye on the ball whatsoever.
Not at all. Even though apparently he said some very fine things about it, he never really made that a part of his campaign. There was, that article reminded me, if you remember, there was that dust up with AIPAC, because AIPAC was very critical of him because of statements like that.
Yes.
And then he didn't appear. The other candidates appeared before AIPAC, and he didn't. This is ancient history now, but I vaguely remember.
Well, here's how ancient history it is. AIPAC, fun fact, tweeted out this video. AIPAC actually tweeted this video out to promote Bernie Sanders' take. Yep.
Yeah. Well, he's no threat now. He's got his mind right.
Please clap.